Hi, you guys. This is Tiny L. I'm going over my ancestry results again with you. Some other names I go by is Samantha Mayat X, and the Africana Mama is my blog that talks really about just being African woman and woman of African descent living in America, and um, mainly created that blog to discuss what it's like to raise my children in America and what our experiences are like, so that we can have our own voices and not have networks speak networks that are not by Black people's like speaking for us. So let's get started. So I did my results for my ancestry. I have another video on here that I went more in very in depth based off of these first results that I got from National Geographic, the Geno 2.0 project. And this is the first I first went with National Geographic just because I felt like National Geographic is a reputable company. I've heard of them for a long time, and I got these results a few years, a couple of, I say like a few years ago. So, when you're first going to go do something as big as deciding I want to know where my ancestry derived from, I wanted to go with someone I kind of felt like I could trust to give me as accurate results as possible, because I didn't really know anything about Ancestry DNA or 23andMe and all those other DNA companies that were out there. So just jumping on right on in there, because I wanted this video to not be as long as the last one. The last one was longer because I did want to go really dig into my ancestry and explaining the results that I found. So I did a lot of research and created a video to discuss those results. And you can check that video out on this channel as well. I think it's called My Ancestry DNA from National Geographic or something along those lines. So these are my results from the Genographic project under the National Geographic. You'll see the regional ancestry, this is from present to 10,000 years ago. And you have to, when you're thinking present 10,000 years ago, this is the most closest time to when the slave trade occurred, because that occurred about 500 years ago. So these are the results of my ancestors from there. So it says 77% sub-Saharan African, 7% Northern European, 6% Mediterranean, and 6% South African, 2% Native American, and 2% Southwest Asian. I wasn't really surprised at my results. I mean, when I first found out about it, like I said, I got these results years ago. I didn't really even know what it meant. So of course, like I've had years to kind of study it a little bit more. And, you can read it and it's just saying, and you can see on the map too, where sub-Saharan Africa is pretty much all of Africa except the northern part. Then there's a little bit of South Africa they're not including in that sub-Saharan African subset. But, I would think that most African diaspora would be from sub-Saharan Africa, just because, well, most of us are derived from West Africa, and then our families migrated across Africa, and we could even have gone up north as well, and then go down here too. And again, remember, this is my answer is most recent to this time period that we're currently in right now, like modern time. So it's from present to 10,000 years ago. And it's saying that this group consists of, this is found at the highest frequency of the people of sub-Saharan Africa, particularly among those speaking Bantu languages. And I think this is one of the most, what do you call it? This is one of the most popular languages in Africa. So almost everybody's going to be from the Bantu speaking language group. and say such as the Yoruba and the Lahia in our reference populations. And you have to remember, like, with these data sets that you get from these DNA tests, they're not, this is like an estimation. And they're gonna become more accurate the more people submit their DNA because they have more test points to compare it to. So this is based off of just what they have in their systems as of right now. And they compare it to other DNA that they have of people in that area. And then that's how they determine like your results. Is I guess comparing it like to those reference they have reference populations, like they know people who are Kenyan, they know people who are Ghanaian, they know people from South Africa. They have reference populations that they compare all of our DNA results to that come in to their labs. Um, okay, so it says likely represents the signal of the original inhabitants of Eastern and Central Africa and was spread in part due to the migrations of the Bantu speakers throughout Africa in the past 2,500 years. It is also found at lower frequencies north of the Sahara in populations such as the Tunisians and Egyptians. And it's saying that, but there's like no blue up there. So I think that this, it's really difficult because it's like you have to do even so much digging because we migrated quite a bit. So then you have Northern European, which this test says I'm 7%. The component of your ancestry is found at higher frequency in Northern European populations. People from the UK, Denmark, Finland, Russia, and Germany in our reference populations. While not limited to these groups, it is found in lower frequencies throughout the rest of Europe. This component is likely the signal of the earliest hunter-gatherer inhabitants of Europe who were the last to make the transition to agriculture as it moved in from the Middle East during the Neolithic period around 8,000 years ago. And once more, you have to remember that the Middle East all of that used to be Africa. So that's like another thing that's a little bit confusing because they call stuff certain things, and it's like, am I really Middle Eastern because that was Africa? But again, like I said, this is the more modern subset result. So at that time, it was considered Middle East, but ancient times, it was Africa. It was all connected. So then you have the Mediterranean. This component of your ancestry is found at highest frequencies in Southern Europe and the Levant. People from Sardinia, Italy, Greece, Lebanon, Egypt, and Tunisia in our refuge populations. And, again, like I was saying, like we wouldn't consider Egypt part of the Mediterranean. Egypt and Tunisia are in Africa. So I think this is the Mediterranean Sea, and maybe that's why they're going with that, because these border the Mediterranean Sea, but this is Africa. So that should be, I would think some of that percentage should be over here, my African ancestry DNA. So it says, while not limited to these groups, it is found at lower frequencies throughout the rest of Europe, the Middle East, Central and South Asia. This component is likely the signal of the Neolithic population expansion from the Middle East, beginning around 8,000 years ago, likely from the western part of the Fertile Crescent. Then we have South African, which I think is so strange because, again, South Africa is part of Africa. So I'm just like, why is South African being treated like it's another part of Africa? So you remember, like on here, there was this little blank spot that wasn't blue. And then you come here, and it pretty much filled that spot. So South African component of my ancestors found the highest frequency in the Khoisan people of southern Africa, the famous Bushmen of the Kalahari. It likely represents the earliest split in the human populations in Africa before we left to colonize the rest of the world more than 100,000 years ago. These early southern Africans were once more widespread, accounting for the low frequency of this component in other African populations. Then we have the Native American, which I was very surprised that it was only 2% because my family had always said that my great grandmother was Native American, and I saw pictures of her with my great grandfather, and he was very dark skinned. African man, and she looked like an Indian to me. So I was surprised that it had only the percentage only was at 2%. And the reason I said Indian is because I just really want. I mean, she looked very Native American, but I learned later that Native Americans are actually African Americans who were already here. So the Native Americans came from Asia and migrated down to America, but when they came, we were already here. So a lot of people who think they have Native American in them, they're actually looking at African Americans who were already living on the continent. So it says this component of your ancestry is found at highest frequency in the populations of the Americas. It represents a signal of the original settlers of North and South America who arrived via the Bering Land Bridge between 15 to 20,000 years ago. Interestingly, the only other place in the world where it is found at frequencies of 2 to 3% is in the central Siberia and Mongolia, the likely place of origin of the first Native Americans. Then you have the last part is Southwest Asian, 2%, and I believe that this part came because in connection to being with the Native Americans. People have procreated with other groups, and that's how I believe that ended up in my DNA. So Southwest Asian says a component of your ancestry is found at highest frequencies in India and neighboring populations. And remember, I believe it was Christopher Columbus or someone back then that came over. They thought that the Native Americans, they thought they were in India, I believe, and that's why they were calling them Indians. And I believe the Native Americans actually did derive from the Indian area, or they were like created as a mix between like Indians and Asians. So this component of your ancestry is found at highest frequencies in India and neighboring populations, including Tajikistan and Iran. In our reference data set, it is also found at lower frequencies in Europe and North Africa. As with the Mediterranean component, it was likely spread during the Neolithic expansion, perhaps from the eastern part of the Fertile Crescent. Individuals with heavy European influence in their ancestry will show traces of this because of Europeans have mixed with people from Southwest Asia over tens of thousands of years. So as you see, people are mixing with other races, and then that's how you're seeing it. So it doesn't necessarily mean, well, it does. It basically means, you have an ancestor that was Northern European that probably got with this Southwest Asian. Like, it's just, you really have to dig deeper to know, like, how did this come to be? Maybe it was a person who was mixed that was white and Asian and maybe got with the Native American. I mean, you don't really know unless you really dig. So it says what your results mean. We compare your DNA results to the reference populations we currently have in our database and estimated which of these populations were most similar to you in terms of the genetic markers you carry. This doesn't necessarily mean that you belong to these groups, but that these groups were a similar genetic match and can therefore be used as a guide to help determine why you have a certain result. Remember, this is a mixture of recent, past 6 generations, and ancient patterns established over thousands of years. So you may see surprising matches. Read each of the population descriptions below to better interpret your particular results. So my first reference population, of course, African American, would be the closest I would be to. And I am African American. I was born in America, and I'm of African descent. So has always been my nationality and what they call me. This reference population is based on samples collected from African Americans living in the southwestern United States. The mixture of regions reflected here is due to forced slavery from Africa to the Americas during the slave trade era. 73% sub-Saharan African, 4% Southern African. There is also a European contribution to the population, comprising the 10% Northern European, 6% Mediterranean, and 4% Southwest Asian components, a total of 20%, as well as a 2% Native American component due to mixing that occurred with Native American tribes after the Africans arrived in the Americas. So you see, this is African American. I don't know why they didn't put the rest of the title here because could be a little bit misleading. But so they would be 73% the African American genetics that they got, that they compare my DNA to, is in that area, southwestern area. 73% sub-Saharan African, 10% Northern European, and I think they chose that location. It was because that's where we went during the slave trade. Yeah, I think it was where we were mainly sent during the slave trade. It was southwestern part of the United States. So that's why they went there, I guess, to get our DNA. Then you had 10% Northern European, 6% Mediterranean, 4% South Asian, 4% South African, 2% Native American. And then for me, I have 4% more sub-Saharan African than the average. I guess the African Americans from that area. I have 3% less Northern European, same amount of Mediterranean, 2% more South African. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yes, 2% more South African because they have 4%. I'm at 6%. 2% of Native American, which matches, and I'm 2% less Southwest Asian. And then you go down here to, and again, I've had a lot of time. This is not my first time seeing these results. So for the National Geographic results that I'm going over, I've had a lot of time to digest this and research it more. So this makes sense to me. Your second reference population, Lohia, Kenya. This reference population is based on samples collected from the Lohia people of Kenya and primarily reflects influences from various African regions. 89% sub-Saharan African and 8% Southern African, with a small amount of possible mixing with Mediterranean populations, 2% Mediterranean. The large sub-Saharan component is due at least in part to the massive migrations of the Bantu-speaking peoples. The Lohia speak a Bantu language from their homelands in West Central Africa near present-day Cameroon throughout Africa over the past 3,500 years. So you go here, they're comparing my DNA to the Lohia people of Kenya, and their sub-Saharan Africans 89%, their South Africans 8%, and their Mediterranean is 2%. And mine is, and these are people that you have to remember probably never left Africa, so they're not going to have as much mixing as my DNA has because we were kidnapped and brought to America. So in the process of that, there was a lot of rapes and marriages and just different things going on with a lot of different groups, racial groups, because of those travels as we were transported during the slave trade. So for me, in comparison to them, I have quite a bit less percentage of sub-Saharan African, 89% for them, 77% for myself. I have 7% Northern European. The Lohia Kenyan people do not have any Northern European in them. I have 4% more Mediterranean than them, 2% less South African, 2% Native American, and they don't have any Native American in them, and I have 2% Southwest Asian. So those are my results, and from what I saw when I first got these results, I pretty much just said I'm Kenyan. My whole time growing up, everybody asked me if I was, let me see if I can find a picture for you guys. I'll show you photos of me. You'll see me in other videos. I was still trying to figure out how to show my face, do a video and record the screen at the same time. I haven't quite figured it out yet, so bear with me, please. So this is a photo of me. Hold on a second. I'm trying to get one that's kind of spot on. So this is one photo of me, and this is another photo of me. These are recent photos. And there you go. So let's minimize that, and then let's go on over to Ancestry DNA. This is my government name, which I've dropped. Tanis is my middle name, so you'll see Samantha Mayadex is from my first name, and I dropped all of it actually, and just took the middle name out and because it's the closest to our roots, Tanisa, and added L to it, which means God. Okay, so these are my DNA results under Ancestrydotcom or Ancestry.com. Sorry, I actually love this website the most because it allows you to connect with your it allows you to connect with your people. Like it doesn't just provide the results, it allows you to also go find those distant cousins, so on and so forth. I mean, you had to pay, but it's worth it, I think. And you also can pay, which I plan on doing this in the future, you can pay $2,000 and have them really dig deep and do that, give you like a certain amount of hours of digging and finding your ancestors. So I think that's pretty cool. So in here you'll see that I say I'm 85% African. So each company is a little bit different. This company just plops it all together. They don't really go off of sub-Saharan African and you're South African and you're this African. They just straight up say you're 85% African. And that would be consistent with National Geographic, because if you add together like sub-Saharan African and the South African parts, you'll get about 85%. 78, so that's 30. It says 83. I think it's 83%. Yep. So it's already. And I did all three, so I could get as accurate results as possible, because I absolutely want to know where my family came from, so I can start to do the research to find my family. Okay, so trying to see here. So you have, starting out, it's really exciting. This is just so fun for me. This is exciting for me because these results, this one and this one, are the newest two that I'd recently done this year. Like I said, this one was done 3 years ago, so I had to sit with this for a long time before I really even understood or was able to process what I had read. So this one, so under Ancestry, I'm 85% African. And then you can click on it. I love how it's presented. It's really pretty. And you start out with Africa Southeastern Bantu, which is 20%. Range, I don't know what that means. I guess if you fall in that range, it puts you, what does it say? Your ethnicity estimate includes a percentage and a range. A lot of brilliant science and math goes into creating this data, and it is fun to learn more about it. It has the estimate, blah 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 blah. We'll go over that some other time. I'm trying to keep this video short for you guys because a lot of people complained that my last video was just too long, and people just want to get to the crust of it, I guess. So Africa Southeastern Bantu, primarily located in South Africa, Kenya, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Angola, Tanzania, Mozambique, Uganda. Also found in Nigeria and Congo. This is kind of confusing a little bit. It's like got these colors going out further here, and I don't really know what that means, but so it says, extending through the heart of Africa, the vast region now inhabited by the Bantu was the stage for one of the greatest migrations in human history. And in time, that migration would become the seedbed for a broad family of related ethnic groups and languages that would wield enormous influence on the ancient and contemporary history of Africa, from kingdoms and trade networks to colonial independence movements and Nobel Prize winning leaders. So how does Samantha Dawson Williams compare to the typical person native to the Africa Southeastern Bantu region? 20% typical native is 72% of something. I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm actually going through this for the first time with you guys. So genetic diversity in the Africa Southeastern Bantu region. Individuals from the Africa Southeastern Bantu region are admixed, which means that when creating genetic ethnicity estimates for people native to this area, we frequently see similarities to DNA profiles from other regions. We found that approximately 72% of the typical Southeastern Bantu region natives' DNA comes from this region. Examples of people native to the South Africa Southeastern Bantu region from a collection of 18 people. Other regions commonly seen in people native to the African Southeastern Bantu region. And this is a collection of 18 people. So you have we have used our reference panel to build a genetic profile for the Africa Southeastern Bantu region. The blue chart above shows examples of ethnicity estimates for people native to this region. For most natives, between 58 and 100% of their DNA looks similar to our profile. It's also possible, however, to find people whose DNA shows very little similarity, some as little as 14%. For people with DNA from other regions, the most common is the neighboring Cameroon-Congo region. About 44% of people from the African Southeastern Bantu region have at least some DNA from Cameroon-Congo. In addition, about 39% of people from the African Southeastern Bantu region have some DNA from the Africa South Central Hunter-Gatherers region. And they all kind of have like different names. So when they start saying the hunter-gatherer region and I'm looking at Africa North, I'm like, what is Africa North? They threw Middle East in there, which used to be Africa. So it's like you gotta like really do your research and study your history to learn what is what. So population history. Oddly, the Africa Southeastern Bantu region has its roots in West Africa, an area that includes Nigeria and Cameroon. And that area, perhaps 3,000 years ago, a group of Niger-Congo languages called Bantu, meaning people, had their origins. As West Africa's population grew, members of the Bantu-speaking group migrated in two directions. Some went south along Africa's west coast, others headed east across the continent, north of the Congo River and its dense forests, a formidable natural barrier. Then they turned south. These migrations spread the Bantu languages and the population's genes over a wide swath of the continent. So that's what I try to explain to people, because they're like, how are you from East Africa and you're from West Africa? And then I explained to them that from my research, which of course I'm still just constantly doing research on this subject because it's so important to me to know where the African diaspora came from so we can go back and reconnect with our families, is to look back and explain to them, I believe that the first humans, they either derived, I want to say they derived from West Africa location, and then they migrated all over Africa as we, I guess they call it colonized, or you go out and you get your land and you raise your family up and you follow where you can have labor and make money and stuff like that. So it's like there was like the iron era, and there was agriculture, and there's different things that, like, right now with the technology age, like a lot of jobs are in DC, so a lot of people are coming from California over to the East Coast. And when you're over in a new location, you're going to start to procreate and meet people on that side and start to have children over there. And so you're creating like a new group of people that are now from, I'm going to use America as an example because it's how I can relate to it. But you're going to say, okay, these people are now from the DC area because that's where they've been there for a long time. They set up shop there. They came to get jobs, and they just they stayed there for many centuries. And so that's basically what happened. And this is really, really good reading, but I am not going to go into all of it because I just wanted to keep it short for everybody. So we're going to jump on into Benin Togo. I'm 19%. And that is on the west side, I think. Yeah, looks like it's on the west side, kind of. If they consider that the west side, or maybe they're calling it Sub-Sahara. For years, anthropologists have looked at African ethnic groups as being mostly solitary and static. Not even. However, historians now know that huge empires and kingdoms with administrations and armies, diplomatic corps, and distant trading partners have long been part of Africa's fabric. This is especially true of West Africa, where migrations, conquest, and intermarriage within allied kingdoms help explain why, for example, 43% of people from the Benin Togo region have DNA that looks similar to the profile for the Ivory Coast Ghana region, and 28% similar to the profile for Nigeria. So a typical native is 82%, and I'm 19%. I'm not going to go all the way down to through that. Then I have 16% Ivory Coast, Primarily located in Ivory Coast and Ghana, also found in Benin, Togo, Mali, Nigeria, Senegal. Every early French and Portuguese explorers identified sections of the West Africa coast by the area's resources, which is how Cote d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast got its name. Neighboring Ghana was known as the Gold Coast until it won its independence from colonial rule in 1957 and named itself after medieval West African Empire. Today, more than 46 million people live in the two countries, with Japan less on gold and ivory than they do chocolate. Ivory Coast and Ghana produce more than half of the world's cocoa. Cool. That's pretty cool and cool information. Then you have Mali. I love saying that word. So this is primarily located in Mali and Guinea. Also found in Ivory Coast, Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Senegal. And please correct me if I am saying these words wrong, because I'm trying my best here. So Mali's modern boundaries were drawn in 1890 when French Sudan was created and united two very different regions, the Sudanian savannas in the south and the Sahara Desert to the north. These man-made borders make modern Mali a multi-ethnic country of diverse peoples as well, but geography has always played a key role in the Mali's history and people. The savannas at the edge of the desert made the area a natural locus for trans-Saharan trade, which connected Western Africa with Europe and Asia in pre-colonial times. For centuries, Mali was a fabled land of gold, scholarship, and empires. And that's 15% for me. And then you have 7% Cameroon and Congo. Primarily located in Cameroon, Gabon, Congo, Republic of Congo, also found in Angola and Chad. Because they lie near or on the equator, these nations typically include tropical rainforests and humid savanna. While the Congo takes its name from the old African kingdom of Congo, Cameroon gets its name from the first Europeans to arrive in the area in 1472. Portuguese sailors found crayfish in the Wouri River and started calling the land the Rio dos Camarões, or River of Shrimp. Eventually, the word Cameroon became Cameroon. So 7% of that region. And then you go down to the trace regions. So it's 4% Nigerian, 4% Senegal. And like they were saying up above, you're going to have a mixture of, you're going to have those other certain regions mixed in with other regions just because of, intermarriage and things like that. Then you go down to America, you have Native American, only 1%, which is very similar again to this DNA because it gave me only 2% of Native Americans. So it's very, it's not a lot. And then you have European, and like I said, I was surprised by the Native American just because my family was acting like, oh, your grandmother is Native American, your great grandmother is Native American. I would think the number would have been higher, but you never really know because they're putting all the people that make up me, and it goes back to like ancient DNA, so it could be her that is at 1% because it's showing here that it can't. She was that ancestor was in America or South America, so it makes sense. So yeah, Native American primarily located in North America, Central America, and South America. Your genetic ethnicity and estimated is you have ancestors from the region that is home to the indigenous people of the Americas. I'm not really going to call them indigenous because they migrated from somewhere else. But I guess so. I mean, everyone's kind of migrated from somewhere else. Then you've got Europe. So you have 4% Ireland and 3% Great Britain. It's all over this area, I guess. England, Scotland, Wales. Also found in Ireland, France, Germany, Denmark, Belgium, Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, and Italy. Then you have Europe West. I was actually stationed in Belgium when I was in the military. So there's probably in Belgium, France, Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein. Also found in England, Denmark, Italy, Slovenia, Czech Republic. Then I have 2% Scandinavian, which is Sweden, Norway, Denmark. Also found Great Britain, France, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, the Baltic States, and Finland. This was a little weird for me. Finland and Northwest Russian. Primarily located in Finland, Russia, Northwest. I do not know this area at all either. Also found in Estonia, Latvia, Sweden, and Lithuania. And then you have 1% Italy and Greece. Primarily located in Italy, Greece. Also found in France, Switzerland, Portugal, Spain, Serbia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Austria, Croatia, Bosnia, Romania, Turkey, Slovenia, Algeria, Tunisia, Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, and Kosovo. And it's kind of where they left out Egypt. Located in the south. And I'm going to say this on that part. Like, I feel like these results are interesting because I always feel like white people or non-black people are trying to lay claim to like Egypt and Ethiopia, so they don't really, like, when you come up here you see part of Ethiopia but they don't name it as part of the African Southeastern Bantu. So it's like, if it's not part of the African Southeastern Bantu, then what is it, you know? And then they have Somalia, but they didn't name that either. So it's like they're picking and choosing what they want to include. Like, I don't know how my people were all over here and they're in Sudan and Chad and Nigeria and Mali, and they just totally didn't come over here. And then my whole life people were asking me if I was Ethiopian. So go figure, you know, it's like, how are they seeing something that these DNA results don't see? So that's like the only thing I'll say is kind of iffy because of that reason. Like, none of them really, they kind of say it like imply that the Mediterranean side would be the Tunisian people and Egyptian. Where was that at? Look right here. They're like, the Mediterranean has Sardinia, Italy, Greece, Lebanon, Egypt, and Tunisia. And I'm like, how did Egypt and Tunisia end up in the Mediterranean group? Okay. And then you see here for sub-Saharan African, all of this is blue. But then they don't really name Ethiopia anywhere, or Somalia for that matter. And I know I look like the people in Egypt, in Ethiopia, and Somalia, and Kenya. All those people, to me, look like me and look the same. Okay, so I'm moving on away from this. So then we're going to go to my third DNA report, 23andMe. And I don't really care for these results because they don't really match the other two. So I was just like, where do these come from? And I actually sent an email to the 23andMe woman to ask her why my results were so different. 1 second. Let me see if I can find an email for you. Let's see here. I'm like, why is it so different from the other two? So let's see if we can find it. And I'll show you guys in a second her response after I go over my results. Okay, so we're going to jump back over here. I'm going to use this one because it's a little easier to follow. Here's a summary. So I don't know if I should look at the summary or the scientific details. Let's see. 1 second. Alright, so logging in, going to the summary. I kind of think I like the summary a little better just because you can see the locations here. So they have a lot of it is coming from this area, which was a shock to me. Then they had the next big part was coming from up here somewhere. I'm not even really sure what this is. This Europe? I can't remember. I think it's Europe because I think that's Italy right there. Then they have like a little part here that's right over here, this region. Then they have a little dark purple that's in the middle, which would be sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa. Then you have the darker part. I guess this is Middle East. Yellow. And then you have a little bit of orange, which is like all this region. Like I have a tiny, tiny bit of orange over there. It's a little confusing too because they have this ring here that's darker. But yes. Okay, so let's go into the results. So this one said I was 83.4% West African, 2.2% Central and South African, and 2.6% broadly sub-Saharan African. And it says, clicking on this one, the genetic diversity of sub-Saharan Africa reflects both the deep history of humans in the region and the recent migrations that have carried the diversity of Western Africa to both Southern and Eastern Africa. And it only said 2.6% of all of this. Sub-Saharan African. Okay, so it's basically saying the majority of my African ancestry, sub-Saharan African ancestry, came from West Africa, which I actually already knew we came from West Africa and we migrated over. So it's expanding from Senegal to Nigeria. West Africa composes about a fifth of the African continent. West Africans have a long shared history and were united by large empires such as the Ghana Empire, dating as far back as the 8th century AD. Other empires later succeeded, making Western Africa a region of strong common heritage. Then you go into Central and South Africa. 2.2%. Central Africa extends from the Central African Republic at its north to Angola at its south. Southern Africa encompasses Namibia, South Africa, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, while the majority of its population is now composed of Bantu peoples. Central Africa is also home to many pygmy populations. Southern Africa was first peopled by pygmies, San, and Khoisan. These hunter-gatherer populations are still alive in this region today. And that matches... Let me see if I can find it. That matches this when it says 6% Bushmen of... highest frequency in the Khoisan people of Southern Africa. So this is 6%, and this one says 2.2%. And then you have the broadly sub-Saharan Africa, which is all of this, which is kind of weird because it actually covers the same piece as this, and it covers this, and it's 2.6%. It sounds like they don't know what to say, so they just threw it together. It's just kind of a mess. The genetic diversity of sub-Saharan Africa reflects both the deep history of humans in the region and the recent migration that have carried the diversity of Western Africa to both Southern and Eastern Africa. So okay, so let's go. I'll go through all the results first before I go into her email about this, because I was kind of disappointed because I finally was sitting here thinking I found a country that I can trace my roots back to, and I can go and just really focus on that location and go back and hopefully meet family members and ancestors and just find out more about my family's history. And then this results come up and they just send me way left field somewhere. It's like I'm either from West Africa or East Africa or South Africa or North. Like, give me one place. Don't be all over the map with it. So it was very disappointing to get the third one and get these results. And so this is European, 14.1%, which is close to the other test. This is 14%. And this one says 7%. So somewhat close, but not as close as it could be to this one. So Northwestern European, Northwestern Europeans, 10.9%, British and Irish. Broadly Northwestern European, which is Norway and Finland and North Baltic and all these places. And then you have Southern European, 0.6%, broadly Southern European, and broadly European. Much of Europe was buried under ice. Miles of was buried under miles of ice 10,000 years ago. As the glaciers receded over millennia, Neolithic farmers from the Near East joined Paleolithic hunter-gatherers to settle Europe. And then you have East Asian and Native American 1.9%. So for here, it says Native Americans 0.9% and Southeast Asian is 0.8%. Broadly East Asian and Native American 0.1%. The peoples of East Asia and the Americas have a shared genetic history. Their common ancestors left the Near East as early as 80,000 years ago, migrating across Asia. The ancestors of Native Americans began to cross into the Americas 12 to 15,000 years ago. So they lived in Asia first, and then they migrated to America. 12 to 15,000 years ago, African Americans were already there. Well, the people that, the Native Americans were Africans. They were already there in America. But that's another subject for another day. Then you have the Middle Eastern and North Africans 0.1%, broadly Middle Eastern and North Africans 0.1%. And let me show you a video. Well, do I want to show it? Let's see. I hate how these alerts come up, they never leave. And this was, I think, BBC. First Americans were black, according to BBC documentary. Let's go to videos. Documented evidence. So this is a short video. So I don't want it to be too long.
Social media is an essential communication channel for your business.
Why is doing that? I'm just going to... Okay.
When you have an environment of commitment and dedication.
Led this way, but I could not vary to another subject when my other subject here. So I said, later on I will write something about that because it's not important in my dissertation at this moment. So that's why I did the book as soon as I finished my dissertation.
Wow, and we should say, we have a picture of the book too, and it's the first Americans were Africans, and we were talking about Dr. Ivan Van Sertima because I remember back in the 1980s, my dad took me to hear him.
This is the one I was looking for. Just because it's a little bit more in depth.
Our elders used to tell us they'd been made by Indians, known locally as the Fierce Ones.
Indians were the obvious candidates. Most of the people who live in northeastern Brazil today are descended from European settlers and African slaves. But these ancestral groups arrived in Brazil just 500 years ago. When the Portuguese first discovered Brazil, they found that Indians were already here. And a few of the local villagers are descendants of mixed marriages between Indians, farmers, and slaves. Indians, in fact, had been in America for thousands of years. Scientists today can tell precisely when they arrived and from where. All native peoples in South and North America belong to a racial type known as Mongoloid. They're descended from the ancient peoples of Siberia. During the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, there was a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Mongoloid peoples were the first to enter the New World, or so experts thought. The Brazilian finds point to a very different story of the discovery of the Americas. paintings on these rock shelters are much older than the Indians. Here, hunters chase giant armadillos, an animal that flourished during the Ice Age long before the arrival of the Indians. There's a playful feel to many of the scenes. Here, a group of men are standing on each other's shoulders, just like a circus act. And here, a rare romantic moment. The scenes conjure up a lost world of innocence. How long ago was this primeval paradise? French archaeologists have just finished digging in Pedra Furada, the largest of the rock shelters. Their aim was to go back in time to a period well before the arrival of American Indians. Every foot they dug took them thousands of years back into prehistory. When they reached layers 40,000 years old, they found these. Pieces of quartzite that look remarkably like stone tools. The edges on one side of the stones were flaked off. Were these stones shaped into cutting tools by human hands? If so, then the history of the discovery of the Americas would have to be rewritten. But if people had been here before the American Indians, surely there would be other traces of their presence. The archaeologists continued to dig, down to depths 50,000 years old. And then they found this. Fragments of animal bone and charcoal. For Anne-Marie Passy, one of the archaeologists involved in the dig, these fragments were proof of human occupation.
We
found structures shaped like hearths. Next to the charcoal, depending on the period, we sometimes found food leftovers of animals they may have eaten.
And southeast of Brazil. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He's been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to. He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians. But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we start running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing just people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing just people was anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That, to me, is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being Mongoloid.
Luthia belongs to a race found historically along the rim of the Indian Ocean, in East Africa, in the islands of South Asia, and in Australia and Melanesia. Was this then the face of a first American? Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Nevis has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
But how could Luthia be African and Australian? According to Walter Nevis, there's a very simple explanation. Luthia is a bit of both. The first humans originated in Africa. It's known that around 100,000 years ago, waves of people migrated out of Africa. One such wave went east, and 60,000 years ago, it reached Australia. Luthia, it seems, belonged to a race of humans descended from Africans, a race that eventually...
Alright, so you guys see,
became today's Australian Aborigines. But if the first people to enter the New World were the ancestors of present-day Aborigines, how could they possibly have reached the Americas? Australia and Southeast Asia are on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, more than 8,000 miles away from South America.
Okay, so we're not going to watch the whole
It's true that during the
thing.
Ice Age, there was...
Because my son just woke up. But basically you're seeing that the original people were African. And that's just a quick video I wanted to show you guys really quickly. Okay, so I wrote 23andMe because I had a question, and I told them I took another DNA test with National Geographic, and the results told me that my DNA most closely matches Kenya, East Africa, or is Kenya considered Central Africa? I did not even see East Africa on you all's chart. Do you all call East Africa something else for your reports, e.g., Middle Eastern? I have also been asked all my life if I am Ethiopian or East African. I thought I was from Kenya, and now I am confused. And then she responded, 23andMe wrote me back, and she said, "Hello, Samantha. Let's see if I can find, yes, customer care 23andMe. Thank you for contacting the 23andMe team. Our ancestry composition report tells you what percent of your DNA comes from each of 31 populations worldwide. The analysis includes DNA you received from all of your ancestors on both sides of your family. The results reflect where your ancestors lived 500 years ago, before the advent of intercontinental travel. Evidence of Kenyan and Ethiopian ancestry would be assigned as East African or broadly Sub-Saharan African within ancestry composition. Keep in mind the population labels in ancestry composition refers to genetically similar groups rather than nationalities. In general, we sought to make the population as small as possible, subject to the constraint of being able to distinguish between them. Populations may be inherently difficult to distinguish because of historical mixing, or as we might not have had enough data to tell them apart." And she said, to view a full list of the reference populations, please click the blue "See all 31 tested populations" under your ancestry composition results. You can read about the population selection process in more detail in the corresponding section of the Ancestry Composition Guide. So basically she was saying that the broadly Sub-Saharan African can be considered the East African side, which was 2.6%, which does not match anyone else's results, especially this one that says I most greatly match the Kenyan. So there you go, you guys. That's my DNA results, and I hope to see you guys real soon. I will continue to try to find out more information and just find out more about my ancestors. So this is really just the beginning for me. I'm trying to find photos so you guys can see me again. Let's see if I can find the other photo. Okay, well, that's it. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. Those are my results. It sometimes leaves you with more questions than you even started with, but I think at the end of it, I am closely related to the people in Kenya, maybe even people of Ethiopia descent. But again, like, my results are also based off of just my mother's side. I had to get my father's DNA from him because I think the female does not carry her father's DNA. So thanks for tuning in, guys, and until I speak to you again, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.